so many of you here in the room, lots of new faces and the regulars, of course. And a special shout out for those joining us remotely. Thank you for tuning in. Now, we are a networking, socializing, and skills sharing community of data professionals in the broadest sense of those words. We cover all roles working with data, whether from database management, data governance, data engineering, data science, data analytics, data policy, ethics, storytelling, and visualizations, and so on. Our membership comprises professionals from executives and directors to juniors, as well as students and enthusiasts. Our home is on meetup.com, and we hold regular events on the last Wednesday of the odd-numbered months. We hold irregular events whenever we can. And we have a Slack workspace where we continue the conversation in between the events. So if you want to keep in touch with the membership and follow what we are planning and doing in between the events, please join our Slack group and say hi. Now, the forum is blessed by having many benefactors. And I am very grateful to all of our sponsors for their generosity and their support. Now, first, Silicon Brighton. Silicon Brighton is a local tech community hub where meetups can grow from an idea to become a roomful of reality. The Brighton Data Forum is one of Silicon Brighton's many meetups. Today's event would have been absolutely impossible without their help. They sponsor, they advise, they promote, they support us with the technology, and they network to help us find the best speakers. If you have an interest in tech, they'll have an event for you. Or if they don't, they'll help you create it yourself. Their work here in the local tech community, their work in the tech community is quite impressive. And so my thanks and the entire forums go to Silicon Brighton. And next, Rittman Mead Consulting. Rittman Mead is a globally recognized analytics consulting firm with contracts across the USA, Europe, and the Middle East and wider. They are experts in all things Oracle and a true knowledge center on data warehousing, business intelligence, analytics, and more. And go see their blog. They have a recent series of blog posts on data governance, data science, and AutoML. Now, in addition to hosting our training events, Rittman Mead have generously sponsored the food and drink for our events for the forums meeting for over a year now. And tonight is no exception. So raise your glass or put your hands together in warm applause for an appreciation for their, thanks to Rittman Mead, thank you. We know how important that is. But we also have a new sponsor to announce. Now, I myself am a penny-pinching camera nerd, and I often hunt for deals online for photography gear. So I'm so happy that we have here in our very own little seaside town the world's best marketplace for used camera gear. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome Brighton-based MPP.com to the forum. MPP.com is generously sponsoring this event and the forum as well. And Nikki Miles, MPP's head of data and analytics, is here with us tonight. Nikki, would you like to come and say a few words?
Hi, yes, so I'm Nikki. I'm the head of data and analytics at MPB. So MPB is the largest global photography and videography trading platform globally. We support visual storytellers and the circular economy. We are based in Brighton, and we were founded in 2011 by our CEO, Matt Barker. In 2021, we were awarded £50 million from Series D funding for investment, and that investment went into data and tech. So in the last 18 months, the data team has been founded. So there's 6 of us at the moment across data science, data engineering, and data analytics. And over the next 12 months, we'll be growing further. And our mission is to create a single source of the truth and put the data in the hands of our stakeholders through analytics, visualization, and predictions and optimization. Yep, and if you're looking for a role and this is of interest, we will be hiring over the next 12 months, and please reach out to me.
Thank you, Nikki, and thanks to npp.com for their sponsorship. Now, tonight, we will be addressing a topic that I'm sure you all have some thoughts about. We'll be addressing how the ever-accelerating march of technology has brought us to this place where artificial intelligence is finding its way into every mundane aspect of our lives. Now, we have been living in the digital age for decades, but today's AI agents are the clearest manifestation yet of the computer as a bicycle for the mind, a tool that races and amplifies human cognitive capabilities. And these AI tools have steadily grown in their ability, but something seems different about the latest ones. Now, is this moment just another step on a continuum of development? Or will future generations look upon ChatGPT and GPT-4 in this particular moment as an epoch-defining turning point? Or if not, is there another, more impactful event ahead of us, possibly coming soon? What is certainly true is that ChatGPT and GPT-4 have spread far beyond the circles of technologists, techno enthusiasts, tech journalism. Everybody is talking about it. So maybe this moment will be remembered as the one that triggered the questions and the conversations and the discussions that we need to have before we take the next leap. For maybe it is the next leap that future generations will divide their history into 2 segments by, before AI and after AI. To tackle these and many more important questions, we have gathered an impressive lineup for you tonight. Now, let me introduce you to Jeremy Horn, a data scientist, founder, and director of local data and analytics consultancy, Data Cove. Jeremy has been working in machine learning since before machines were learning. And Jeremy, in addition to being a warmly funny guy, was brave enough to volunteer for the role of panel moderator. And we're very lucky to have Adebisi Adewusi, a science and technology policy consultant at Technopolis Group, with a particular focus on emerging digital technologies, such as artificial intelligence, robotics, augmented reality, virtual reality. Adebisi has evaluated national AI strategies, and she has conducted research on societal impacts of the use of AI-powered technologies, especially in the global south. Now, with Technopolis Group, she is currently working on an impact study for the Alan Turing Institute. Next, we have Colin Hayhurst. He is the CEO of Mojeek.com and the strongest privacy advocate I've ever known. Mojeek.com is the internet search engine that won't track its users. Previously, Colin was a co-founder of Data Javelin, a machine learning consultancy. But I met Colin when he was organizing the Sussex Data Science meetup, which he founded, and was I always regarded as a sibling of the Brighton Data Forum. Colin recently appeared at the Sussex Data Science meetup to discuss how the race for AI supremacy threatens the web as we know it. And that talk was just posted on Silicon Brighton's YouTube channel, and I recommend it. And we have a returning guest, the AI artist and speaker Eric Drass, who goes by Shardcore online. He has a long history with algorithms in the world of academia as a graduate researcher in psychology and neuroscience, and in the tech entrepreneur sphere as a tech entrepreneur in the era of the dot-com boom and bust, and in the world of art and social media. You can see his AI-inspired works on shardcore.org. Now, I highly recommend a visit there. You'll see his paintings, his digital art, and his installations and experiments, social experiments on social media. Eric gave us an unforgettable presentation in July of 2021 at the Brighton Data Forum. And you'll find that as well on Silicon Brighton's YouTube channel. It's good to see you again, Eric. Thanks for coming back. And to start us off, we have the instigator of tonight's event, John Mead, CEO of Rittman Mead, a self-described lover of technology, and I can vouch for that one, especially when it comes to the latest Apple gear. As John will himself explain, it's thanks to John's research into the rabbit hole of artificial intelligence, these emerging technologies, the compounding effects and their amplification, the accelerated pace, the absence of serious considerations for the long-term future they herald. That kicked off this whole event. Now, John will now take the stage and lay out the topic and the questions for the panel. Okay, John.
Thank you. Thanks, Adam. Just need to get my clicker and the microphone in the right hands. Two things to deal with. Right, Oscar, thank you very much. I now know something about what Oscar does here because I've been a recipient of all the emails Oscar has sent organising this. So I think everyone should give Oscar a massive hand for organising these events. Second thing, there's quite a lot of beer and pizza left. So don't be shy. We did buy it for you. You may as well eat it. Can't really take it home. So yeah, I know we're at an event and don't go wandering around in the middle, but yeah, please feel free to help yourselves. On to the event. Right, the title of the presentation is, Have We Gone Too Far? And Is There a Grown-Up in the Room? And to sort of really kind of run through what I'm going to do, fortunately, Oscar has introduced me. I'm going to explain a little bit why this came about, what the idea was, give a bit of an introduction into the subject, go through some scenarios and problems surrounding it, and then my conclusions from it, from that kind of thought process. That'll take about half an hour, and then we've got a panel and discussion, which is scheduled for about an hour. So to start at the beginning, over the pandemic, and probably since then, I ended up doing two things a lot. One, walking the dog, and another, running. And while doing this, I started listening to a lot of books. And a lot of books turned out to be quite a lot of books about data and technology and superintelligence and this, that, and the other. And my mind started to sort of race a little bit and wonder what was going to happen with this and where it was all going and were other people thinking about it and all of the kind of things like that. And I don't really go on social media that much, so maybe that would have been a good outlet for this or something. I should have gone on Twitter. But unfortunately, one day I got back from a dog walk and I sent Oscar an email and I sort of like splurged out this abstract, which turned out to be the abstract of this event, which was kind of, look, you know, who's looking at this? What's actually going on here? So that's kind of the backstory to the presentation. I do work in technology a lot and understand a lot about data and maybe how companies move around data, but I don't necessarily really know where this is going to go for society. And it does frighten me a bit that no one's really looking at this. And I'll try and explain, you know, what my thoughts are, how I got to those thoughts and where we are. So ChatGPT is the sort of thing to talk about. So let's talk about ChatGPT. So I subscribe to a Nick Cave newsletter, and obviously someone decided to email Nick and say, oh, look, I've written a song on ChatGPT in the style of Nick Cave. Nick wasn't impressed, not unsurprisingly. And his sort of, this song is bullshit, I thought sort of summed it up. But it sort of does start to go to one of the themes that I started to think about. So one is, what's the difference between humans and machines? I mean, yes, there's some really obvious ones, but when it sort of really comes down to it, can machines give us a sort of human experience? And as the response went on, there are a couple of things that sort of struck me. The first one was this sort of idea that, you know, it can never be slowed down as it moves towards either a utopian future or total destruction, which is kind of the, you know, have we gone too far kind of bit in a way. But then also, you know, this idea of songs arising out of suffering and algorithms not feeling. And this is sort of like, you know, maybe this dynamic of humans and machines. So you start to kind of think, well, what is it to be human? What is it, you know, what have I done really that, you know, ChatGPT couldn't do? I've taken other people's thoughts and ideas and I've sort of synthesized them and sort of sprayed them randomly around in my head while walking the dog, and then sort of come out with things and dictated them into my phone and slowly built up a presentation. So does anyone really care if I've written this? You probably, I'm guessing most people would prefer it if I did one way or another. And so I think we still have this preference that we would prefer maybe a person to do something or to instigate something or to be the creative force behind something than a machine. But if you take that to a sort of slightly ridiculous idea, you've kind of got, right, a machine wash my clothes, and you don't expect me to hand wash my clothes or sort of judge me for that in any way. So we're quite comfortable in some walks of life of machines doing what, you know, what can be done. Maybe in other walks of life would prefer the human to do it. So again, what's going on with this sort of dynamic? And again, there was always the sort of thing at school about if you gave enough monkeys typewriters, you know, they would come up with the works of Shakespeare. So does that mean that Shakespeare's not creative or less creative than, you know, or as creative as a monkey? Or is it the fact that you can sort of spot the kind of edition or the version that is Shakespeare? Maybe that's the genius he had. So a few people sort of, the quote at the top is what I've heard when people have talked about their experiences with ChatGPT. It's the sort of, it feels like someone telling you about their dream. It's not a sort of actual experience yourself. It's actually a sort of second-hand experience. So I don't know how many people listen to podcasts and kind of various things like that, but you know, most people have experimented with some sort of artificial text at the beginning of something. And you can sort of tell, right? You kind of know something's not quite right. And then the host says, oh, that was something I did in AI or generated the text. And you can sort of tell. So I think there's something more we have. And the kind of often where this sort of comes to is sort of this idea of consciousness and, you know, sort of our experience, you know, sort of what's the point in really being here? You know, other than sort of doing jobs and getting on and doing something, it is all about, you know, sort of our conscious experience of things. And so, you know, with that kind of in mind, sort of, are we replaceable by machines? Well, is that replaceable by machines? There's a whole, you know, sort of conscious being substrate dependent or independent. But I think it's worth just sort of noting at this point. But again, coming back to humans, I think we have a bit of a problem, or we're about to create a problem, which is we're very used to being the sort of dominant species on the world. We've been around for a while. We maybe haven't managed the world particularly well, or we have, but we're used to, you know, pretty much coming and going as we please. We can do what we want. And the kind of question I've kind of got in a way is, are we about to do something really stupid by inventing things that are more intelligent than us, kind of thing? You know, were there sort of gorillas sitting around at one point, and then suddenly the humans came along, and the gorillas are a bit like, oh crap, right? We've now got to go and sit in a zoo forever. This isn't the life I was imagining. So are we kind of, you know, do we not actually really get this? And, you know, sort of by stumbling into this world and creating things that are, you know, potentially more intelligent than us, are we actually, you know, going to be in a situation where, you know, the robots are coming, right, we're going to do something. So before we get too far into it, some definitions. So intelligence is defined as the ability to accomplish complex goals. So I can do something that's, you know, more than one thing. Narrow intelligence is sort of best example, AlphaGo, Deep Blue beating Garry Kasparov. You know, it can do one single thing. It's trained incredibly well to play chess. General intelligence is I can do a broad range of things. This is generally kind of humans. We can do this. And then the artificial side of that is to accomplish any cognitive task as well as humans. So what we're kind of talking about in terms of things going too far is this sort of artificial general intelligence. So 2 questions. Who thinks that AGI will be here before the end of the century? 1. No. 50%, maybe 50%. I'll go back 1. There you go. And who has travel insurance? Oh, slightly more. So why? We mitigate risks, right? We get travel insurance, not because we know something's going to happen, but because something might go wrong. So we spend some resources or some time and money or something on doing something before we go on holiday. So that's my kind of analogy with this. Does it really matter whether AGI will get here or not? There is definitely a chance it will do. And there's a survey here from the Future of Life, and I'll talk about them in a bit. But yeah, okay, people that happen to go to this website thought around 2050 would be the time. So, okay, people that work in this sort of field think it might happen. So my concerns is there's a significant chance, my opinion, that it will happen. The growth in the field is ungoverned and often driven by corporations. The field is poorly understood by general population, no offense to my mum or anyone like that, and the government. Institutions generally have been devalued. I think, you know, sort of if you look back through what's happened through social media, what happened through COVID, any kind of institution, for right or wrong, has been undermined to some point. And this is potentially important as we go forward, because historically, institutions have been the guardians of how certain things have developed. So if we want to devalue them or not trust them, we might want to replace them with something else. And potentially society and all of us, not necessarily us in this room, but as a whole, and if you took 2016 as an example, i.e. Brexit and electing Trump, is probably not on the best sort of moral standing that we've been on for a while. So, you know, maybe we're not in the best hands to look after the planet. And just to cap it off, most technological advancements would generally benefit the few. So these are the things coming. A couple of quotes. So science gathers knowledge faster than society gathers wisdom. And by wisdom, I think we're looking at the experience to deal with this. So again, we're all people that work in data. We can all potentially think about this and affect this. And I think the question we're trying to avoid in some way is, for those of you that have kids, your kids looking back at you and kind of going, well, why didn't you do something? You know, sort of, we knew it was happening. It was all over the press and everyone just sort of carried on. So one of the books I read was a book called Life 3.0 by a guy called Max Tegmark. And he had a good framing of the question. And the question was, instead of maybe worrying, well, I suppose it's a way of describing it, but instead of just worrying about the negative things, maybe we should define what we want the future to look like. And we all kind of know, if we have jobs that have goals or incentives, that actually if you put goals in front of someone, people are quite good at actually meeting those goals. So I quite like this framework. So I started doing mind maps and looking at different scenarios. And I'm going to run through a couple of them now to raise some of the sort of scenarios, concerns, and problems. You don't have to read it all now if you're squinting. I'll come on to them. But again, the purpose of this within the context of this session is not necessarily to answer all those questions, but maybe to sort of prompt questions that, you know, we can talk about and talk to the panel about later. So I think the first scenario I broadly looked at was that humans would rule. We would control the AIs in some way, or if possible. And there was a kind of range with that. Apparently this has got a laser. Not really. So I left profit on there because I think a lot of things now are being driven by corporations, and I'll come back to this point. So the development of some of these things is being driven, or most of these things is being driven through sort of commercial enterprise. For this diagram or slide, I chose health as a domain, but there's lots of different areas we could look at and I'll come on to. And in a way, you can kind of use AI to either have good benefits or benign or evil benefits. So if you took health, you could say, okay, well, AI will be great. We can do better diagnosis. that might help people, especially in sort of more sort of poorer or more developing countries. This might really save lives. It will really make a difference. And similarly, if you're a kind of evil dictator type, you can then create more virulent pathogens. You can create more pandemics. You can kill people. You might better wipe out whole sort of neighboring countries or races or something. So, there's a wide range, depending on sort of human nature, that we can do with this. Now, there's a quote here. I was going to try and do a sort of blankety blank thing, if anyone remembers the program, but I'm going to read it out, and then if anyone knows who made this quote, you can say, "Artificial intelligence is the future, not only for blank, but for all humankind. It comes with colossal opportunities, but also threats that are difficult to predict. Whoever becomes the leader in this sphere will become the ruler of the world." Any ideas? Elmo? No. Putin. Quite a while ago. So yeah, it's not exactly like the evil dictator scenario has gone unnoticed. So kind of questions and problems. So I chose health just for the first slide, but there's lots of areas. We could look at surveillance. If we put cameras up and use artificial intelligence to watch what everyone's doing, maybe we could save bad things happening to people in dark corners. So maybe there's a benefit to it. But alternatively, maybe there's sort of the evil side of it. Maybe that means we monitor everyone and control everyone. Again, the same with weapons, content generation. And this is sort of really where a lot of the focus is at the moment. There's a huge amount of, sort of not really the sort of ChatGPT generative stuff, but going back to kind of Cambridge Analytica and Facebook, the fact that we can actually generate things, change people's behavior, sort of feed social media with things that will actually change people's opinion has long been around. And again, we can use that for good or bad. Probably most people would think it's generally used for bad. But all the way through this, I'm talking about good and bad. And there's a kind of question here, and I've tried to highlight the questions in red in terms of value alignment. So what is that? I'll come to that. And then if we have these powerful machines doing stuff, what's to stop them going on beyond their objectives? So we have a sort of control breakout problem. And then on a sort of weird moral tangent, then if we had these machines, and if machines could be conscious, are we not enslaving conscious beings to do our bidding? And is that not a route we've been down already and is sort of fairly unpleasant in terms of humanity? So, sort of, again, it's sort of maybe weird and unusual, but, would we prefer, if we're going to have machines working for us, them all to be zombies? But obviously, if they're zombies, then how will they ever stop themselves doing kind of bad things or have any sort of idea of what's right and wrong? So, sort of a lot of questions around that. A lot of the work these days, as I've said, is driven by private enterprise as well. I think this is different to how maybe nuclear and other technologies have evolved in the past. And again, the sort of continual development of that can lead to sort of almost sort of arms race-like approaches by people, which generally can either lead to sort of chaos, sort of total destruction, or people cheating and not really kind of following boundaries. And then there's a sort of interesting idea of using AI to actually solve the problem of what to do with AI. So could we actually use a sort of artificial general intelligence to come up with the answer to this, and then how to set up AI to further humanity for the rest of life? So just to dive into a couple of these, value alignment. What is a good decision? Whose values? There's a lot of people in the world. There's a lot of people with different values. We could talk about utility or sort of pragmatism. But again, often someone's gain is someone's loss. And then we've got the problem of time. Values will change over time. And if you look at organizations that have tried to maintain sort of value over time or value systems over time, you get to things like, the church and religious organizations. And I'm not sure they're kind of models that we necessarily want to put up to sort of base this kind of system on. And then if values change over time, can they learn? And are they actually able to say, I don't know the answer to this question at the right time. Instead of having some sort of probabilistic outcome, they have to guess the sort of best thing they can. So could we get a kind of human in the loop, or some way of keeping them in touch and having a I don't know answer? And then finally, the kind of unintended consequences that generally comes up in a lot of conversations about optimizing. If I optimize, a robot to do something, it will just carry on doing it at the expense of everything in sight. There's a famous example about paperclips. If I tell my robot to make paperclips, it will just make paperclips. It will then start ripping up all the chairs and make more paperclips, and then slowly it will destroy the world for the sake of paperclips. So yeah, maybe you forgot to put the instruction in the code to say stop making paperclips when there's enough, or whatever the right code would be. Corporations. I'm sort of touching on this a lot, and I do think it is problematic. I don't think necessarily all corporations are bad, but it does seem to be the driver. If you look at what's happened with sort of the Bing chatbot, ChatGPT, there's this sort of weird unregulated testing. Stuff's just getting released, really, and we're the guinea pigs, which is quite exciting, and there's some very interesting things in the media about it, and some very bizarre conversations people are having with chatbots, but people are working it out as they go along, and it's sort of like, okay, but not sure that's right. I don't know. It's sort of, should you be testing these things on us? And also the corporations, and I think I'd extend corporations to sort of governments. If you think of the sort of Chinese government and the surveillance, they have all the data. What gets really interesting is that you need a huge corpus of data to train these things. And that is being, sort of created through this, and, sort of in a way reinforced ourselves. Every time we're interacting with ChatGPT, we're feeding, even more in there. So there is a huge sort of balance of power in terms of the organizations that are able to do this, and some that, and people that aren't. And I think with that, and a little bit comes back to that kind of like mutual destruction and sort of arms race thing, private organizations or commercial companies are highly incentivized to advance. We've seen it in a million different industries. You've seen it in the oil industry, you've seen it in the pharmaceutical industry. Massive corners are cut. Terrible things happen that people find out 20 years later. Industry as a whole, I don't think, again, is a trustworthy thing for our sort of values, or to take our values forward. And then we look at control. So we can make these things. Let's say we get the values right. We get the, it's owned by a cooperative. It's not owned by a corporation. And then what happens if we can't turn it off? If it just keeps making paperclips, or we give it the wrong instructions? Can we isolate it? Can we put it in a box? Can we actually control it? We were saying that this is about the humans controlling the AI. Maybe we can just have inputs and outputs to it. How can it get hold of things? And I think there's some examples here. If you think of a scenario, if you as an adult, for some reason, are looking after a bunch of small children, and I think if you're not able to help them, you will do what you can to get out. So if you're the adult that's tied to a chair, and you're meant to be looking after some children, and you can see they're about to, I don't know, stick their fingers in a plug socket, you will do all you can to get off that chair, even though you might be, agreed that, of course, I'll stay on the chair. So just because a robot sort of escapes or wants to break out, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's doing something bad. It might be trying to help us in some way. So I think when I come back to all of this, where humans fit is really interesting in this, because assuming we could control, and assuming, we have some idea of value, that really sort of comes from us. But what worries me is sort of the values that we have and what we're doing and the way it's being developed is not good. And I sort of almost started this sort of idea with Oscar, and I was trying not to be overly negative, but sort of, look, humans are a bit shit, and we've got all this technology, and we're going to destroy the world. So let's look at another scenario. What happens if the machines rule? And so to kind of go into this, and again, if they have the objective of saving the planet or making the planet last as long as possible, again, there's a couple of alternatives they've got. Well, we've got these humans on the planet. They're sort of making a big mess and destroying the planet slowly and a bit of a nuisance. So maybe we could kill all the humans. And, you know, would that make the planet last longer? And again, coming back to that unintended consequences and optimization, you know, sort of, and are we doing something really stupid? You know, who knows? And then the second side of it is, okay, when I say maintain humans, I mean, that could be give us a beautiful life. You know, what does that actually mean? You know, sort of, we could be happy as hell. We could be in some sort of enclosure or zoo or something and just put on virtual reality and fed recreational drugs. It could be fantastic. You never know. But, you know, sort of, you know, why is that kind of bad in a way? And you look at, I don't know who's watched Guardians of the Galaxy, but there was this whole, and I think a lot of the other Marvel films are interlinked with it. But there was this character called Thanos, and he was a sort of generally portrayed as a baddie. And his sort of big act was to sort of get these stones of the Infinity Stones from around the universe. And the problem was that the universe was overpopulated and creatures were suffering, basically. And he came up with this idea that if he got all the Infinity Stones and snapped his fingers, half the beings in the universe would just disappear. And he did it, and everyone disappeared. You'll be, sorry if that was a spoiler, by the way. Don't worry, there's more. So again, coming back to this kind of maintaining humans, would we really trust the robots, the machines, the AGIs to look after us? Because they maybe have a very pragmatic and objective way of looking at it. And a little bit coming back to the kind of zoo example and, you know, what we're actually like as humans. And the reason we would laugh at having VR headsets and taking recreational drugs or whatever it was we enjoyed doing is because I think we know deep down it wouldn't be fulfilling. So if you kind of take the idea that I want to get up to the top of Everest, I want to climb Mount Everest, it's not because I want to get really cold toes. It's not because, you know, sort of I just want to be on the top. And if a sort of helicopter appeared and just said, right, I'm going to fly you to the top of Everest, it's got no real value to me. I would probably get cold toes at that point. But what I'm actually interested in is actually walking up Mount Everest. It's actually the challenge. It's the doing. It's the thing. It's the fact that I know it's difficult. So having it given to me isn't really very interesting or useful. So the third group of scenarios was around no AI. It's like, do we just put it back in a box and pretend it never happened or stop? And it did look at, you know, there have been other examples where technology has gone backwards after the Romans left the UK or Great Britain. You know, sort of the aqueducts fell down a bit. I think those, I can't remember the name, but the heating systems they had under the floor kind of failed. You know, we just didn't have the technology. We didn't have the money. We didn't have the economy. We didn't have the engineers. And technology actually regressed once the Romans left. And again, there are kind of more famous examples of people who have gone against technology in different ways. The Luddites, which obviously were a group of people that protested against the Industrial Revolution. And in the US, there's the Amish who live a sort of a life that, you know, sort of doesn't have technology. They reject technology in their life. And, you know, who's to say they're not as happy as us? So, you know, this is possible. But there are some risks with it. It's like, if we don't do it, if you have this kind of, we're going to put AI back in the box, given the kind of pervasiveness of the ability to sort of execute AI and do things, is it not really easy for someone just to go and, you know, open the box over there and then come and say, well, now I am the evil dictator and, you know, sort of overrun the world. So it's a very risky strategy. It's not like nuclear weapons or something where there's a much higher chance of noticing that you're, you know, sort of mining uranium or doing whatever you do to make nuclear weapons. It's much more sort of physical, visible act. So, you know, are there other options about differentiating research and deployment? So can you support the research of AI, but not have the deployment? So I think with all of those sort of things in mind, the kind of question and the kind of, I suppose, reason for being there is what we can do now. So there was one thing I wanted to dive a little bit further about regulation. And I thought I'd start with genetic engineering and Dolly the sheep, and many things I thought I'd never talk about in my life. So this was an example of regulation where it's kind of worked. So DNA manipulation started in around the 70s. There was a conference in 1975 that actually established a set of guidelines for conducting experiments. And they are, experiments are very controlled now. This led to an international treaty. And according to kind of scientists and people around the time, it actually kind of developed a process where sort of scientists or technology leaders could actually develop guidelines and sort of govern new technologies. So not only did it give us an idea that something like genetic engineering could be controlled, but there was a kind of process. And there was a biologist called Paul Berg, who was a Nobel Prize winner, and there was a long quote afterwards. But again, the line or the sentence that sort of struck me was, once scientists from corporations begin to dominate the research enterprise, it'll simply be too late. So again, have we got to that point inadvertently already? It feels like it a bit. Other examples would be sort of nuclear and weapons control. So nuclear is a bit, I sort of looked into this and there wasn't such a clear kind of thread for me. On the top left, there's the Manhattan Project. The Manhattan Project was actually run by the US, the Canadian, and the UK governments. So again, there was more control about that. And there is an Atomic Energy Agency. So again, there is this framework for sort of governing what happens. And obviously there's the whole nuclear arms race, and now people are removing and destroying nuclear weapons. So again, there is a history here for sort of controlling it. But I think there's something happened a bit more visible with nuclear, which this is a picture of Chernobyl, which probably, obviously frightened the hell out of the world. And then there's this sort of like very kind of visual image of a sort of, mushroom cloud. And I think where we sort of conceived nuclear, I mean, I sort of grew up in the 70s, and there was this sort of like latent fear of sort of nuclear war or something. So I think we had this much deeper fear of something like nuclear. And I'm not sure we have that with AI. It's a bit more sort of jokey and ChatGPT and what's going to happen here. So there's a couple of things in place now, or more than a couple, to be honest. So where I first started, there was an author I mentioned called Max Tegmark. He has set up something called the Future of Life Institute. There's a list of current projects, various people that have signed up, and they've held a couple of conferences, and they're quite heavy in promoting it. And again, I would recommend his book and having a look at the URLs. But they're not alone. There's actually a lot of people talking about this. There are various other sort of independent organizations, the Partnership on AI. Both the EU and the US government have either bills of rights or government acts about it. The EU Act states that, if you're being talked to by a robot or by an artificial intelligence, it has to declare that that's the case. And again, there are laws coming in, and society or governments will have to change to do this. There are organizations associated with universities. The Center for Human Compatible AI, I think, is at Berkeley. And then the University of Sussex has, a whole load of research going on. So, conclusion. So where did I get to with all of this? I believed that AGI will be achieved and has the potential to seriously change the world. And unless we do something about it, and I think that was the key bit, I think it will be worse for the majority, if not all people. There's a kind of however, and I think I started this whole process with a kind of, well, humans and machines are ultimately the same. It's just sort of atoms, bytes, and things going around. But I did end up also concluding that humans are different to machines, or maybe things taught through machine learning. And the idea of creativity and new ideas sort of came from a kind of rejection of previous ideas and disobedience, a kind of non-obeying rules. And this kind of like unpredictable or irrational kind of thing that people had was actually what made us sort of either stupid or interesting. And it's like, I think it was sort of summarized by a machine wouldn't make a more intelligent machine to make itself extinct. That's sort of something only we're capable of in a kind of weird, irrational way. And that's kind of us. So, you know, within that, we're not really we are interested in the outcomes. You know, if we walk up Everest or do that kind of thing, you know, we want the experience of doing it. And there's a huge amount of sort of conscious experience and perception in that that's very hard to sort of actually measure. You know, we support the underdog sometimes when we watch when we watch a match or do something. Other times we don't. It's just totally nuanced. So as sort of people, this sort of irrationality and disobedience, I think, keeps us separate from the machines. So I think this is the question I'll just get you to all think about. I think it may be one of the panel questions. And that's it. I will take questions if anyone's got anything very specific about the presentation, but otherwise I'd suggest you ask them to everyone in the panel.
Of AI, and artificial general intelligence was at the bottom. It's like, was it something, the ability to do all the things that a person could do, all the tasks?
Yeah, complex tasks that people could do and are broad.
So does that? I think the rest of the presentation after that seemed to focus on the kind of the limit case, but I think the limit case is something that there's a bit missing. There's like a fifth level of like a motivation, like being motivated to do things, not just being instructed to. But am I right? Is that a fifth level, or is that incorporated in the fourth bit?
Well, I suppose the motivation could come out of things like the values and you know, sort of whether something's been instructed, and this sort of idea that you know, the way that we train models at the moment is sort of based on optimization or a goal, isn't it? It's sort of objectives based. What's the, you know, even with ChatGPT, read all this stuff, and then when you type something, find the best thing to follow that. So we're kind of on this sort of optimization kind of, you know, that's broad sort of oversimplification, but I think broadly kind of how it works. So the motivation for that is sort of never ending, because you can always try and find that better thing. So I don't know if that answers your question.
But it's not consciously motivated.
It's not consciously motivated.
That's the question. Okay.
So yeah, I never got to where the machines could have consciousness or not. I kind of, yeah, we could be here a long time.
Well, all right. Thank you very much, John. Right now, we're just going to take a very quick break while we set up for the panel. And questions like that, you know, please keep them coming. But you have 5 minutes to come and hoover up the remaining refreshments and go to the bathroom if needed. And I will meet here again with the panel in the sofa. So thank you.
That was brilliant. Seriously. There you go. It's almost like with smoking.
welcome again to the remote viewers and to all of you here in the room. I really hope that John's talk stirred up your mind as much as it did mine. I think this has been a great encapsulation of the range of problems and discussion points that we can have. But now for the main event, let's hear it from the illustrious panel. And Jeremy, you can take it away now. Thank you.
Oh, wow.
Oh, sorry. No, you can't. Sorry. Taking the word back. What an anticlimax. Oh, sorry. I forgot to tell you. We would really like to hear your questions, your commentary, your input into this part of the event. And to that effect, we have set up a microphone here for you to line up to ask your questions. Okay, so please, if you have something to add for the panel, come here. You have a form an orderly line, and then please make it brief. So thank you very much.
Sure. 100%. Yeah. Should we get going? Right, I'm going to get going before Oscar comes and steals the mic again. It's quite different from down here, looking up. I mean, I co-work in here. I don't get this view very often. It's quite weird. But it's an absolute honor to be sitting here chairing this panel of, I'm going to say, local celebrities. I mean, fantastic local celebrities that can give us their views on AI. John's also promised a few more TV spoilers as well. So if you listen for long enough, you might get to find out what's happening in all of your favorite shows tonight. But no, as I said, it's an absolute honor. I've been working in AI and machine learning since 2005. So to sit here and be a part of this conversation is brilliant. As Oscar said, we really want to get the audience involved in this. So we are going to be coming to you guys a lot throughout the panel discussion. I don't want it to be us preaching all of our views on AI to you. We want to hear from you. We'll give plenty of opportunity for you to talk and ask questions as well. I feel a bit like a BBC game show host. So, you know, if you're watching out there, BBC, this is a plug for a brand new TV game show. No, it's not. But anyway, John and I actually did not talk before the panel. So I've written out a few panel questions, and this is almost going to feel like we did have a chat before this. It almost feels like we're aligned before this event started. John's last slide was referencing Max Tegmark's quote again, and it's, what do we want the future to be like? And hilariously, that was my first question. So I think John's told us what he wants the future to be like. But I'd love to hear from the rest of the panel. So starting with Adebisi, what do you want the future to be like?
Right. So I want the future to be one where AI is used for good, not one where AI is a tool to solve every problem, because not every problem is an AI problem. Most of them are social problems. So a future where AI is used for good to solve things like the grand challenges like climate change and in health. So that's what I want to see.
Can you hear me? I would say I would like the future to be fully automated luxury communism. Fully automated luxury communism. Well, potentially gay.
You're going to have to explain that a bit more.
So I think this is going to open up to a broader question, but I think AI currently is intertwined with capitalism enormously. As John alluded to, corporations are making AI. Corporations to do the right thing, because there's no interest under capitalism to do the right thing. There's only an interest to make more money. So I think the fully automated luxury, potentially gay communism is going to way forward, right? I think the benevolent AI with a sensible redistribution of wealth is probably the only sensible way forward. I won't say any more about that. I'll pass it on.
How do I follow that? Yeah, I guess on the same theme, I want to see the future where the benefits and in all the different forms are more equally distributed. And I think there are a lot of benefits to come from AI that you can already see and we can't even imagine yet. So that's the positive bit. I'm now going to turn into the doom monger. What do I want to see? I want to be, I guess, I would like to see my Thank you. My grandchildren have a planet to live on, a planet which is biologically alive, and yeah, and the robots don't wipe us out. We'll talk about that later.
I think for me, there's sort of like minor things and major things. So I spoke about health and that idea, and it does feel like, you know, it's closer to a no-brainer that AI could be used to enhance healthcare. Like, you know, sort of, there are lots of problems that are health related in the world. Could it actually be used to do that? Could some form of central regulation, or, you know, some sort of global committee to be formed to sort of pull in that kind of research and to centralize that research, and to then use, you know, there's a huge amount of compute power or whatever going on in the world that probably does things that aren't great for humanity, you know, works out the next TikTok video you're going to watch or something. You know, could we re-channel some of that into, actually working out how to solve complex, let's say, health problems or other things? So, you know, that kind of centralized sort of regulation, I think, you know, for something that most people would agree. And yeah, I get the kind of unintended consequences. It might, you know, sort of, I haven't thought it all the way through, but there are some kind of, you know, low hanging fruit, some hopefully things that are positive to most people that, you know, we can start with, we can do stuff. And then I kind of think the other side, and it's sort of why I went down that sort of Mount Everest kind of rabbit hole, is that, you know, sort of as a person living in the world, and you mentioned your grandchildren, I don't think we kind of, okay, another film spoiler for you. If anyone's seen Wall-E, I don't think we kind of want the world to look like Wall-E. I'd recommend watching it if you haven't, because by the end of it, it's a bit shit, really. We all kind of sit around in sort of, you know, tracksuits, getting fat, not being able to do anything. And, you know, the sort of, you know, I don't think anyone sits there going, I really want that in my life. I'd like to be served and to sort of not really have to do anything kind of thing. You know, no one's really looking forward to that. So all of that kind of, you know, sort of, I need a robot in my house, or I'm going to doing lots of things to make life easy that doesn't really need to be made easy. You know, it's just convenience. I think there's a bit of a danger with humans that we're really lazy. And so we do take advantage of those things when they come up, and it's a bit like, oh, that's a good idea. There's a robot washing my car or doing whatever. And then, you know, those things slowly get whistled away. And I think, you know, we do need to keep doing stuff and not go down the sort of lazy route of having stuff done for us in a way.
Well, certainly no doom and gloom in those answers then, thank goodness for that. It's prompted so many questions, but I'm gonna tell myself to stick to the script. But I do want to ask one question of the audience. Quick show of hands, who here is scared of AI taking over the world? There you go, and the panel as well. Who here is more scared of AI taking over the world after what they've heard tonight? Doing a good job. Anyone that's not scared of AI taking over the world, would you be happy to share with us why you're not scared? Anybody with their hand up?
More intrigued than anything? Sorry, can I ask you? Sure.
Yeah, I'm more intrigued than anything. Maybe naive, and then founded in kind of being intrigued in the wrong thing. But I think it would be quite interesting to just experience that.
And possibly the intrigue also to kind of, it's one of those things in life, is let's just see what happens with this. Let's just ride it out and see what happens. Is there one other?
Yeah, quite scared, but it's not so much that the AI is going to take over the world, although yeah, maybe, but it's more the because there's something above AI, which is like the owners of the AI, and I guess it's fear about what's going to happen at that level, like what they want to happen to the world, and do they have enough wisdom to make that choice for everyone?
I think we'll take one more and then we'll respond on that. Was there one more?
Sorry, could you wait for the mic?
I think it's like being worried about news agencies being bad. I mean, they're only bad when the people who own them make them do bad things, right? So news agencies are good when they're good, and then when they're owned by people who are bad, they're bad. So if AI is owned by people who wish to do bad, then they will do bad. So then you can point your finger at AI, or point your finger at the people who are utilizing the AI, weaponizing the AI.
What do you mean by owned? Fox News.
I think it's definitely great to hear some different views from the audience. Adebisi, you had your hand up as well and said you're not worried. So do you want to explain to everybody why you're not worried?
Right. In my opinion, I think artificial general intelligence is a long, long way off, even if we're going to achieve that. I think it's hard to give consciousness to AI, and a decent amount of the news or information about AI is largely drawn from fiction and science fiction, the way we look at technologies. Something I forgot what I wanted to say, but Hollywood and fiction has a good influence on how we look at technologies and technology taking over the world. I don't think we're quite there yet, or if we're going to get there in our lifetime, definitely not. So no. And it is important to note that some of what we ascribe to AI isn't AI. There's a human somewhere pulling some strings. There was a report in Times magazine that showed that one of these AI tools was actually being had input from humans in Kenya who were like filtering out the outputs. So, you know, we've got that. So a lot of hype in AI, and I think the hype is related to marketing and people wanting more money for these tools. That's my opinion.
It's good to get kind of a varied opinion level on this as well. And I think perhaps now, given that we're talking about uncertainty and different opinions, it's probably a good time to talk about the open letter that was, you know, almost, I mean, obviously the open letter was written with this event in mind, right? For those of you that don't know what I'm talking about, there was a letter to pause the giant AI experiments signed, I think, by over 2,500 people now, or roughly. Yeah, tens of thousands. But I think with that in mind, where do we think we need to be before we can continue to evolve these tools? So perhaps, Colin, you could start us off on that one.
Yeah, just on the letter, I think it came out at 2 o'clock this morning. I woke up early, unusually for me, and at 6 o'clock and saw it and read it and thought, that's not that well written, but I've got to sign this because I think people need to stand up. You know, I've been involved in AI for a number of years, so I do know a bit about it from both the commercial and technical side. So I think the point is that basically the letter was saying, though you haven't seen it, saying we need to pause AI for 6 months, and it's signed by a lot of very prominent people. I'm sure, well, I signed it, and I'm sure people who signed it realise that it's not going to happen. We're not going to have the pause, but I think it's time for people to actually consider it. I think the timing, saying to some of the people earlier when we were chatting, timing is good because of recent events, but also Jeffrey Hinton, who's the kind of the godfather of AI, came out and did a TV interview. I think it was on Monday or the weekend with Canadian TV. He's kind of the he's actually the guy who actually worked on neural networks back in I think it was the 70s or the 80s when everybody thought he was crazy, and he's kind of the godfather of it. And for instance, one of his students is actually one of the co-founders of OpenAI. So he said something at the weekend, which is a great video. I suggest you watch it. And he said he's seriously worried, and he's been very surprised how things are rapidly developing. So that was that's the letter. I can't remember what the question was.
Do you want me to remind you of the question for everybody else?
Sure.
So in relation to the letter, because we're talking about pausing these giant AI experiments, so where do we think we need to be before we can continue to evolve these tools?
Well, I think there's a couple of parts to this that need to be teased out. I think Adebisi's point about the fact that there's a lot of humans involved is very true. I think that the AI is currently a lot of cherry picking. People are showing you the best looking pictures and the best looking responses. Why, on the other hand, why I think this is an inflection point is because the large scale adoption of language models shifts the relationship with AI very dramatically. Because up until now, the only things that use language are other embodied humans. And suddenly we're living in a culture that has these things that is able to produce and converse language like humans. And we've been evolved for 300,000 years to accept that things that speak language to us are like us, and we will empathize with them and trust them. So there's a whole bunch of low-level psychology that comes into play when a thing starts talking to you that wasn't around before. So part of the danger right now is it's not that these things are brilliant and they're super intelligent, it's the fact that we're going to get used to talking to them. And we are going to imbue them with a whole bunch of perceived intelligence and agency that they don't actually have. But the game that they're playing, this language game they're playing with us, they're doing it in a very sophisticated manner. They can produce language and they can also draw from a huge range of sources that no one person can keep in their head. So the kind of entity is different. I would caution using it any terms like AGI yet, but there's a qualitative difference with things that you can talk to. And I think that's why it's an inflection point. So I think the danger is actually going to be more cultural. Our culture will have to adapt to things that we chat to in a human-like way. And I think that will happen very quickly. And it won't be because they're super, super clever in the background. It's because they're just much easier to talk to. And I think that's part of the danger is going to be the cultural shift there that's going to come before the general intelligence skills.
I think from my point of view, again, it a little bit comes back to sort of governance and regulatory. There are obviously, if you look at, I suppose, how the world works, and there are potential sort of bad outcomes that can come from things like, you know, sort of people misusing chat on the internet, then I think there needs to be some kind of regulation or control around that. You know, there's very extreme cases of how it could be misused against sort of minors and various things. You know, it just feels like open season at the moment that this technology has come out. And I think that's what I meant a little bit by the kind of, you know, it's just being tested on the population. And it feels like assuming by stopping all sort of AI experiments, they mean the sort of large generative, you know, sort of open AI, Bing, Bard, or all of the kind of, you know, large tech companies search things. So yeah, it just feels like that's just been thrown at the population, and there's probably not the sort of legal or regulatory, or from what you said, even the sort of human capacity to deal with that. And so getting those in place and getting the idea of, you know, sort of even the idea of responsibility. So if Chat GPT or something comes up and, you know, there's a teenager online and, you know, somehow it gets into a conversation that they should go and kill themselves or something. Yes, there's guardrails on this and all these things. You know, where's even the legal responsibility? I don't think anything is understood at the moment. You know, it just really is the Wild West. So I think there needs to be some kind of understanding of where the legal responsibilities are with this. And, you know, that and other things like that will start to force responsibility and sort of ownership and taking accountability for what people are developing.
I would like to add that the call for AI regulation is not new. It is something that the AI community, the ethics community has been advocating for. People like Sophia Noble, Ruha Benjamin have been saying that these tools need to be regulated. The question of if it can be paused for 6 months, no, but I don't think anybody's going to do that. And we must keep in mind when talking about regulations that these technology companies have been dissolving their ethic groups. And I wonder what that signals for the future from AI as a whole.
Brilliant. Well, it seems like it's open mic night as well tonight. I'm loving this. I'm loving the queue for it's really British as well, this queue forming here. Lincoln has a question for our panel.
And so I just wanted to, I'm so glad you brought up the work of the king, because that's
what I came to talk about. That's why I stood up. And I was wondering if you guys, if I could get your thoughts a little bit on the current harms that that AI is causing. So one, I guess, like exploitation of workers in the global south. The example of OpenAI using workers in Kenya isn't the only example. There's other examples. I think in Berkeley, they have little robots that can deliver you pizza, and they figured out that it was like cheaper to hire people in Southeast Asia to do the navigation than it was to actually build the navigation system. But they market this as like these, AI little robots that are delivering you pizza. So there's that. There's that potential harm, or that current harm that is currently happening. Then there's also the other issue is, our planet has a limited carbon budget, which we are rapidly burning through. The amount of compute power that is going into these things, particularly like, GPU compute, is astronomical. And that is all using up our limited carbon budget. So maybe we don't have to worry about the future harms because we're not going to be around to experience them because we're going to burn through our carbon budget and we're all going to be dead by the time that AGI arrives. So I was just wondering if I could get the panel's thoughts on not the potential future harms, but the actual current harms that are occurring in the world.
Yeah, I think Adebisi is the best person to start on that one.
Yeah. And thank you for the questions. Right, starting with the current harms of AI. I'll start with AI in predictive policing. AI tools are increasingly used by police departments across the world to identify criminals and places where criminal activities can occur. The issue with this is that the data that powers these AI technologies are often biased, in the sense that these data are collected based on sometimes historically corrupt policing data. So that means that these technologies misidentify people a lot. They're not quite good at capturing people of color. They kind of like, their cameras, and if you know how cameras work, they tend to like, I think, overexpose people of color. So that means that you're not seeing us correctly. And when you deploy these tools to society, that means that you're identifying people as criminals who are not criminals. And it's been documented that in the US, this has been done, and people have suffered great injustice by being identified as criminals when they are not criminals in the first place. Also, we have the issue of the deployment of AI in recruitment. It's a nice one, not a nice one. Yeah, so companies have used AI in recruitment, and one tech company did this, and the result was that women were not being selected as the right candidate for jobs. So imagine a world where every recruitment company uses an AI tool to pick who the best candidate is. Women will not be getting certain jobs because we are just deemed as not fit. And why is that? Because the data that feeds these technologies are actually biased in some form. So those are two problems that are happening. Another potential problem is the use of AI, deepfakes. Yeah, deepfakes are going to be a problem, especially in the global south where misinformation is quite high, and people sometimes do not have the capacity to verify this information. And what does that mean for democracy? That means our democratic institutions will be questioned. If somebody can go create a deepfake video of a president saying XYZ thing that he did not say or she did not say, that is a problem for those countries. Yeah.
Wow, that was a pretty deep answer as well. There's a lot of detail in there. Does anybody else on the panel have something to add? Eric?
Obviously agree with all of that stuff. I've worked a lot with deepfakes, so I'm kind of somewhat on the other side there. I think one of the features to be afraid of right now is a lot of trust is being put into these models. A lot of work is being done to make them behave themselves. But the fundamental truth is ChatGPT, in fact, all the GPTs, are trained on the internet. The internet is made of all sorts of horrible shit. The internet is made of us, but it's a horrible, horrible mirror of what we are. So it contains all sorts of darkness. and all sorts of badness that can appear. And I think, obviously the racial bias is phenomenal, particularly in image-based stuff. The vast majority of photos on the internet are of white bros in California, and all the image recognition systems are based on data sets that they've already got of white bros in California. And it's not representative of the world, nor is it representative of perhaps the ideals that we would like to hope that we have in ourselves. It's scraping 4chan, for fuck's sake, right? It's not scraping the great works of our moral thinkers. So I think there's a danger in the fact that it's reflecting back nonsense, not just the hallucinations, but biased hallucinations. I think it's one of the key problems. And the other one, I think, is the current threat is going to be hugely disruptive. I think don't underestimate how disruptive this technology is going to be very, very quickly. Obviously, as an artist, I've seen that wave hit quite dramatically in the last few months. It's coming for everyone to some degree. And I think the UK has 82% employment in service industry. Every single one of those jobs is under threat from someone plugging in ChatGPT to it. So I think the immediate threat is going to be that. It's going to be disruptive threat for us right here. And there's no way around that because, money's got a money, right? And as long as there's a profit in it, someone's going to do it.
Yeah, I think there's, talking about bias, I think there's something that's kind of obvious when you think of it, people don't mention it, is that these, obviously there are large ones being developed in China, and well, it's different, but essentially the ones being used in the West are, it's pretty much at this stage, they're English language, large language models. And in fact, I would say American language models. So there's kind of a very deep, insidious bias, which we already have in current digital platforms anyway, but I think it's going to be accentuated with these models. So I'm very interested in, there's a big project called Bloom, which is a large language model, which is being specifically trained by thousands of people around the world, supporting about 100 languages. And I think so an open source one as well. So I think things like that are going to be really important for the future.
I suppose really an extension of what's been said, but I think there's a kind of radicalization. So if you look at how most people use social media, most people get opinions and news from social media, not everyone, but most people. Social media is incentivized to get you to look at the next thing. An algorithm is probably behind that. The algorithm will promote something that is shocking to you, or more likely to promote something that is shocking. People will get more radicalized. So I think that's been happening. That's been happening for years. And coming to your question of what's happening now, you can see that. You can see how kids interact with phones. So you can see, this is not the same as it was 10, 20 years ago. So, that's something that we're kind of, I suppose, looking at the moment that doesn't require particularly or any more AI than we have, or a better algorithm than we have. And yeah, that's what we're dealing with.
Great. I think I'm going to do one more question, then we're going to get a bit more audience involvement again. Don't worry, you don't have to do a dance or anything like that. Everyone's really nervous now. They're going to have to do a dance. But we're talking a lot about new technologies here. And I suppose it brings into question, and John mentioned it in his talk, alignment. And so what does everybody think about the AI alignment efforts so far? And I think we'll start with Colin on that one.
Yeah, so alignment's the big topic, I think. And, if you're going to go away from tonight and actually interested in this whole area, I think go and do some looking at the issue around alignment. It's kind of the central topic. And essentially that's about AI, developing AI which is aligned with human values. So the danger is that we'll have a misalignment. So we'd end up with AI which develops its own dangerous goals and then has the aim of defeating humanity. So that's when the big concern that the experts have the concern about. And so actually all the big AI labs, the big corporations, they all have substantial efforts, and they certainly talk enormously about huge efforts they're making in terms of alignment. I'm sure they're not doing as much as they say they're doing in their propaganda, but they are all taking it seriously at this stage. And there's some really fantastic work going on, really great work. But what I worry about is where that's going to go in the next few years with the commercial arms race that's just broken out in the last few months, and also the sort of a nationalistic AI arms race, in particular between US and China. So just to say one more thing about alignment, and then maybe I'll pass on the microphone and maybe come back, is that so alignment's a kind of central topic. So I'm going to illustrate this by this stage where alignment's at in practice is, for instance, ChatGPT is essentially it's GPT-3, but then it's been trained to be aligned with 3 values. So I'm trying to remember the numbers. It was like, there's a huge data set that was used to develop GPT-3, but 2 billion tokens, or sort of trillions of words. And then they used a data set which is like I can't remember, it's like 10 million tokens or something. So a much smaller data set, which was used to align GPT-3 to create ChatGPT. And that work was done by these workers in Kenya that Lincoln referred to. And I'll just summarize the main process that went on there. Was essentially they, OpenAI gave the people in Kenya, they gave them prompts that people had put into GPT-3 on their open playground in previous months, and gave them, for each prompt, they gave them 4 to 9 possible responses to that prompt. And then these workers in Kenya were asked to rate the responses, from best to worst. And those responses were basically used to develop what's called a reward model, which was supposedly aligned GPT so that it didn't, say nasty things and so on, behaved well. And so I think I'll come back to what it was trained for in a moment, but this is illustrated when Microsoft released what was called Sydney, or what somebody found out was called Sydney, where they clearly hadn't done the same alignment training, because it was threatening people and doing all sorts of nasty things, which some of you might have seen on the internet. If you went on Reddit, there's some quite incredible things. Anyway, but to come back to the point, point I want to make last before I pass on is that they were asked to align, to score these responses on 3 values, which were honesty, helpfulness, and harmlessness. Okay, so, and this is a central theme in all these training of AIs and things so they actually, they're trained on certain values. And one of the key things is, and I'll shut up in a minute, is that, who decides what these values are? I mean, it sounds great, doesn't it? And it's all three great values, but it could have been trained on other ones. And for instance, I've been using another big chatbot called Character AI, and I don't know for sure, but I think it, well, I have some evidence, but I think it's pretty clear it was trained on some different values, and one of them was curiosity. And actually, I found that particular one, which isn't so well known, because it's often, better for depending on what you want to do. So this issue of alignment and what the values are, who chooses those values, is really a central topic.
Yeah, I obviously agree with all of that. I think it's worth pausing for a minute just to think about what these models generally are. So they're frequently deep learning models, which is neural network models that learn from what you show them. So what you show them is incredibly important. A neural network model only really reflects back the statistical distribution of the data you give it. So this has 2 ramifications. The first one is you want to be very careful about what you feed it, because if you feed it stuff that's biased, you get bias out, as has been demonstrated. So these attempts to align it are generally about tweaking the data set so it's less racist. Let's start there. The second problem with that is that the models that it produces after it's done all this learning are fundamentally inscrutable. No one can go in there and fix it. You can't go into a neural network model and say, oh, that's the bit where you're a little bit racist. We'll just take that bit out. You'll be fine. No, you can't. You have to retrain it with a different set of data repeatedly over and over again. And to touch on the carbon footprint question earlier, I think the estimate was $12 billion worth of compute went into training GPT-3. $12 million worth of energy just went in to make that one model. Imagine you want to change it. Imagine if someone comes and says, your model's a bit racist. Can you make it a bit better? I'm going to spend another 12 million retraining it. No, I'm not going to do that. So the fact that the easiest thing to do is just scrape the internet and feed it in, and then you've got a system that you can't then fix without retraining, is fundamentally going to align your model with a set of unknown, unknown feelings and ideals, because all you've done is scrape the internet and spat it in. So I think this issue of alignment is going to come up again and again. I see that someone analyzed ChatGPT and found that it was left-leaning, and a researcher went off and generated right GPT, where he inverted the latent representations for a certain set of questions, and lo and behold, you've got a right-wing version of the model. So I think that my prediction for the immediate threat is going to be not people talking about ChatGPT. There's going to be 100,000 of these bastards out there, each of them with their own agenda that, again, is going to be inscrutable and, beyond our control. So I think I don't know who takes charge of that, but at the moment it's Elon Musk and Google, the people who've got the data and the compute. But that's cheaper and cheaper. I got a GPT model running on my GPU only today, so it's going to be in the hands of consumers very soon.
Yeah.
I know we've got a question from the audience, but we'll wrap up the panel's views on this one, and then we'll take your question.
Yeah, I think I'd extend what Eric said. The point made over there was about news agencies, and if you sort of transpose the question onto that and say, well, how do we get news agencies with values? What sort of happened is, well, we've got lots of news agencies. There are left-wing, right-wing, whatever news agencies. So the value alignment will probably end up, being distributed across different models. There'll be different things you can go to get different responses. I think where that's simple, as long as there's a little sign in the top left, Fox News, okay, I know it's probably going to like Trump or whatever. What gets maybe more confusing or is more difficult to regulate is if that's hidden or obfuscated in ways. So I'm expecting to get Fox News, but I'm getting CBN or whatever. So I think it will, and your point, compute will get a lot cheaper. It always has done, so there will be these kind of, coming back to the question about, where do you set the values? There are too many people with too many opinions to get some kind of consensus. There always has been, in a way. I'm sure there'll be some sort of broad churches, and I probably choose that term deliberately from a kind of religious kind of point, or groups of people who will, assemble under one set of values. But yeah, anyone can set up anything, and there's a kind of potential weird freedom of speech of chatbots there. Kind of, okay, I'm allowed a right-wing one, or I'm allowed a left-wing one, or whatever, as long as it stays within the rules of the government, as exactly is now for speech of people.
All right. On this issue of alignment, I think there should be like third-party involvement in alignments, because it's looking like tech companies are setting these values themselves. So it's like being the judge and jury in your own case. So I think open it up to people to, take a look at what's behind the black box and see what's going on there.
We had a question from the audience as well.
It's kind of been answered, I think, but the comment was like, what if 10,000 of these bastards come along and retrain it with their own point of view? That seems closer to democracy than to try and figure out who is the one person that can be at the top of the hierarchy. I guess to turn this comment into something that sounds like a question, what does the panel think?
Eric, do you wanna start?
Yes.
I think you raised that point.
Yeah, to answer that, I'm going to turn tables on Eric completely and say, although I do sympathise with him, I think actually this is very idealistic. I don't think it's going to happen, but I think the solution is that it gets totally democratized, and we can all have our own personalized AI assistants. Yeah, if we could go all that way, at the end of the day, we're all sitting here. We've all got our own individual values, right? We're not beating each other up. We're not shooting each other. We can't survive as a civil society without, we have to have laws, and we have to have police, unfortunately, and to deal with the bad actors. But generally, I'm optimistic. People are generally good. Most people are good. We have the psychopaths and sociopaths and the nutters who cause trouble, which is why we have laws. But I think the solution could be literally you can have everybody can have their own AI, and I was talking with this I think last year with one of my colleagues and thought it was great, and I thought it's going to be way off, but it's already happening. I mean, you were just saying you're running your own chatbot. I mean, I read last week that somebody's been running there's a large, well, it's not so large, but it is a large language model called Alpaca, which was actually a trained model called Meta released a large language called Llama in kind of a small and medium-sized versions. And then it was trained by 5 students at Stanford, to be like ChatGPT was, and you can actually run that on somebody had actually run it on a Raspberry Pi. Actually, the reason it's happening is because somebody leaked the Meta model, so it's already here. And I think, the governments and the large corporations would want you to believe that this stuff is safe in their hands. You need lots of computing power to train them, and only they can do it. But don't believe it. I think it's possible. We could all be running, chatbots or AIs on our watches in a few years' time.
We certainly will be. I think they're going to be everywhere. I think the beautiful utopian idea that we're going to just talk to our own personal chatbot and everything will be fine is a bit naive, I'm afraid, because it's going to be Google, it's going to be Microsoft, right? It's going to be the channels that have the greatest reach. I think the one that I found the most disturbing recently is that apparently TikTok have introduced a chat agent as a default buddy for all TikTok users. So the kids who, I want to chat about my day, what happened in school, my friends aren't online, there's someone there to talk to you. Now, that large language model is probably created by some shady Chinese company that we know nothing about, but it's in the hands of hundreds of millions of kids right now. So I think, yes, there will be lots of them, but some of them are going to have a lot more access to people than others, and the ones that have access to our kids are perhaps the ones you should worry about first.
I'll extend that to gaming. So I presume there'll be a lot of non-player characters that will be driven by chatbots that won't be individually trained by your family. So again, I'd sort of say that. I don't know if anyone on a more company note saw the kind of Microsoft Copilot kind of demo thing where this AI is going to do your spreadsheets. And as you were talking about it, I wonder then whether if you had a small company, part of setting up your Microsoft, whatever it's going to be, 365 AI kind of thing, is you try and imbue it with the culture of your company and send it photos of your staff party and, here's, we'll download our Slack conversations into it to train it. So, and then it'll write emails in the style of our company or whatever.
So your company will have generated all of that by AI in the first place.
Well, yeah, so I don't know where you start then, but you can kind of see it, can't you, as part of an onboarding process for a small or large company. It's like, okay, our emails will be written in this style. So yeah,
sorry to butt in. Or it could be that your new employee comes in and you say, we want to check that you align with the values of this company. Please let us have access to all of your data so we can retrain our model to, it cuts both ways. I think.
It does.
That's all right. That's a good question. Talking about if everybody has their own kind of AI kind of thing, who is everybody? The global south, the global north? That's the question. Definitely not people in Africa. We're not going to have our own AIs. We don't have the resources. We can't afford it. So in a world whereby who has access to these chatbots, as a personal chatbot, is going to determine who gets what, when, and how. And in the long run, it's going to create a very unequal society.
Do you think it'll be beneficial, though, to people to have them? To anyone with them? So if it creates an unequal society, it would have to create advantage to having them. And I'm not sure it would.
Right. I think Oscar's at the mic. Have you got a question?
Hello, yes, I have a question from the remote audience. 2 questions, in fact.
Okay.
And the first one I'm paraphrasing is how the panel strikes the balance between, on one side, the hype and hysteria versus the sarcastic cynicism around these AI tools, and how should non-technical, the population at large, strike that balance. On one end, you have claims that these are, well, we just saw a slide with a Terminator on it. On one end, we have that. And on the other, no, they're just regurgitating the internet and putting together badly and putting and creating bad Nick Cave songs. And we don't have to worry about it. How do you approach it? And what advice do you have for non-technical audiences? That was the first question. Sorry, it was very long.
But should we take them one at a time and then?
Sure.
Yeah. So
Oh, me. Could you summarize the question again? It was quite long.
So I think, and Oscar will tell me if I'm wrong, but I think the question here, so this is looking at the media reporting of AI, and there's often quite a lot of hype, there's often quite a lot of inaccuracy. And what would be your advice to kind of the ordinary person out there to understand the actual developments past all this hype and distortion by the media? Was that right, Oscar?
All right, got it. Thanks. Okay. I'm not a technical person. My background is in science policy and technology policy. So a good place to start would be from tracing the history of AI. AI is not a new technology. It's been around since the 50s. So that would be a good place to start. A good place is to like look at the history of the evolvement of AI. AI has gone through what we call AI winters. AI winters were the periods whereby there was like low attention being given to AI, and all of a sudden you have the like AI summers where there's lots of money and investment going into AI, and the news outlets just go crazy about AI. So it's not a new technology. A good place is to read about the history of AI and how it's being used and developed in society, and some good books to read about AI and its deployment and the history of AI and these tools is books on race and technology by Ruha Benjamin, and a book called Dark Matter. Dark Matters by Simone Brown, and also Automating Inequality. These are good books to look about that will teach you or educate you on the history of AI and what it is and what it is not. Yeah.
I think I'd separate slightly ChatGPT and AI. So ChatGPT at the moment is what's captured everyone's imagination and the conversation here. And it's sort of like poster child shop window. And probably understanding, you know, sort of, you could divide that question into two things. It's like, what's something like ChatGPT going to do for me? And maybe that goes down the sort of chatbot route of the previous question. But maybe what's the impact of AI on society? Again, is sort of a slightly different question, a much more longer term question to ask. And again, you know, sort of I'd look at the history, I'd look at books that are available with that. I don't think that's as fast moving a thing as sort of ChatGPT. So I think, you know, some of the organizations I posted up there are people trying to provide information, provide ways of understanding this. So I would try and point those in those directions, really.
Yeah, two different aspects. I would don't just read a chatbot's response because they do bullshit. You can use them to learn, but check out what it's saying. They're particularly biased when you ask them about themselves, you may have noticed. Second piece of advice, a bit contrarian perhaps. You know, I've had some good suggestions here, so a different one. I would go to individual writers. I mean, they might be a bit more in depth, a bit more for the general public, but you know, I think people are pretty good at figuring things out. So I would suggest look at. There's lots of good writers on Substack. A lot of the you know, people who really know this stuff with very different views about it on Substack. You know, so obviously you can. Other brands are available like Medium and so on, but Substack is particularly prevalent with people who know about this stuff.
Yeah, on that note, Gary Marcus on Substack. Gary Marcus is a contemporary of mine when I did my PhD in neural networks in the 90s. So this stuff's been around for a long time. I think Colin's point about being aware that the machines lie is very important, because of my earlier point about trusting everything that is said in a natural language kind of way. We inherently believe it because it's talking to us in a human-like way. It's still spouting bullshit a lot of the time. And rather flippantly, I don't know, learn how to nap some stone axes, retrain as a plumber. Maybe that's the answer.
Brilliant. Have you given an answer, John? I've lost track now. I know incredibly, we've just been talking for a long time and we're coming close to time on this. Oscar, there was one other question from the remote audience.
Yeah, sure, if you allow it. The second question, and again, I'm paraphrasing, is with everything that can be now generated, deep-faked, and automatically generated at scale, what is the panel's advice to see through it? And how do we now go about determining authenticity and truthfulness when the deluge of deepfakes and auto-generated content with a mission, will be put in front of us?
So if I can ask the panel to give a brief response to this one so that we can get some questions from the audience. I think Eric, as a lover of deepfakes, you're the best person to start here.
In terms of deepfakes, my line is, I have a lot of faith that culture adapts. And just because you're spooked by a deepfake means that culture will adapt and people will spot them very quickly. And people will learn to mistrust things that they previously trusted. Now that has an eroding effect on society as a whole, but I think culture itself adapts to misinformation quite well. We've been lied to all our lives. I think the quest for truth is, innate in us as humans. We want to know what's real and what isn't. I think people will always look for that. And my personal answer is, if you can see the whites of their eyes across a pub table while you're having a drink, well, then you probably believe it. Everything else is, up for manipulation, unfortunately. So don't trust anything, I guess.
Does anybody else on the panel have a view on that, or should we take some questions?
Just a quick one. I think regulation that states that these AI created media should be watermarked could help people who can't identify these things to no, this is a AI generated thing with those watermarks. That would help, I think.
Just to extend that, and I don't know this, but isn't this what blockchain could be used for? Does anyone know blockchain?
I'm not going to answer that.
That's so 2022, isn't it?
Great. Have we got any questions from the room? So we've got one up at the front here. Oscar roving with the mic and the beer.
Thank you very much. Hi, I'm probably a generation older than many people in this room, so please humour an old man. I'll start off with a kind of trivial point and then go on to something a bit more serious. Certainly for me, I've been in AI and machine learning since 1994, so I'm that old, but that doesn't particularly colour this comment. My generation, especially to me, cannot often take these chatbots and things terribly seriously. To me, they're an electronic form of a swearing parrot. They cause huge amusement in the early things, and when you get used to them, you get bored with them fairly quickly. Most of the chatbots I deal with have got no sense of anticipation whatsoever. They just kind of regurgitate. I speak bitterly because in the last few days I've been fighting with both the Virgin Media and the EDF chatbots. And one of the games on my generation is, what is the fastest way to crash a chatbot? Right, so that's what we do, because the faster you crash them, the quicker you can get through to, talking to a human. So my final trivial observation on this is, if I ever install, was it ChatGPI, whatever it's called, or I don't know what it is, my first question to it is something like, why is Jeremy Hunt such a twat? So that's the kind of level that I have 3 degrees.
We can be friends.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So, okay. But my serious point, come back to, so I didn't catch your name because this is the serious part of my thing. You were saying there were issues with facial recognition and color and kind of whatever. To me, That's not artificial intelligence. That is bad programming, right? So either the programmers who developed that are cretins, or there's an issue with the technology for, you know, the color spectrum of things that it does. So for me, again, for my generation, if a person of color was ever hauled up in front of a court accused of some kind of criminal offense based on this, any defense barrister could stand up and ask an expert, is this software flawed in any way? And any expert would say, oh yes, it doesn't work terribly well with people of color. So either the judge would throw that out, or a jury would certainly. I mean, I would. That's just my generation. I'm not saying everybody in this room would. But for me, if I was in court and a barrister stood up and said, this software is flawed, I would throw it out as a member of the jury, or certainly the judiciary should throw it out, because it's clearly bollocks, if you'll pardon my French. Sorry, that's a rantings of an old man. I'll pass over to this, but that's, so, you know, I probably said enough. I did have some serious other things about evolution, but I'll leave it at that.
Right, can I comment on that? Like I said, I'm more a technical person. However, we are aware that there is evidence to show are powered by AI in some form. To get to your point of issue where a judge would throw that case out because you would ask, but the history, the evidence shows that we don't have that history of people of color going to court proceedings and being given that opportunity. No, we're not judged in that way. This is a conversation around social justice, and things do not work that way for people of color. I know that this is not the place to have that conversation, but it's what it is. And there's evidence to point to that. Yeah.
So any barrister with any skill would immediately,
Pardon me, I'm going to have to ask you to wait for the microphone for the remote attendees.
Sorry, just come back on that. But any defense barrister with any kind of common sense would raise that immediately. Sorry, this is me. Yeah, that's my view. Certainly as a juror, because it now seems to be so well known that there are flaws in this system, it cannot be hidden from the general public. Sorry.
I'm very conscious of time, that we're going to get kicked out in a minute or two. I can see that Brian had a question. Andrew had a question. Brian, do you want to ask a question?
Yes, this is, well, it's more targeted to Eric than anyone else. I'd like to make a ChatGPT musical analogy with the music technology with which, when it came out, worried a lot of people. Do you think ChatGPT has more in common with the sampler or auto-tune? And how worried should we be?
Interesting question. I think it has the power to disrupt the sampler, more so than auto-tune, but I think its effect on society is going to be more like auto-tune. And that our expectation of interaction with other people will be smoothed out by AI. Pretty soon, all the emails you receive at work are going to be AI filtered. And most of the responses you give will be tailored by AI. So the visible communication of human beings will be smoothed out like auto-tune. The effect that has on our society will be as disruptive as a sampler.
Well, hands up, who can name another one from the last 5 years?
That's because we're old.
That's a good point. And anybody else want to share a view on that one? I think this is probably our last question. And anybody else want to share a view on Brian's question on the panel?
I hope it's as much as a sampler. Is all I can say.
Right, we got one more. I think probably last one in the room. Lincoln's got another question at the back.
So I just wanted to come back to a couple of points. One on like democratizing AI, thinking about it in terms of like, well, we have lots of news agencies, so you know everyone kind of has free speech. Getting onto the point about racial bias, things like that. I think there's like something that is like often overlooked with a lot of these discussions about technology and about institutions, is that you can't separate out people from technology, because technology is made by people. You can't separate out people from institutions, because people make institutions. And so a lot of the time when we think about, okay, well, let's democratize this, let everyone have their own say, we forget that like, if we live in an unequal society, technology that is built by people that live in an unequal society reinforce those inequalities. Freedom of speech is great, but some people's voices are louder. And that means louder voices can reinforce inequalities that favor them, right? The same with institutions. Institutions can reinforce inequalities that favor them. It's all well and good to think, okay, well, maybe we can just educate people about something like racial bias in algorithms. But we know from like the history of like courts and law enforcement that we know things like eyewitness testimony is incredibly bad. And people have gone up and tried to give expert testimony at court cases to say eyewitness testimony is bad and you can't rely on like people identifying other people. But yet it still is the case that if you're a person of color and you go up in a court case, that you are more likely to be identified as a perpetrator of a crime, even if it's not you. And you know, we know that there's like people on death row in the US that have been misidentified. But we know all of these things are bad, but there is, you know, institutions reinforce power structures that favor them. Corporations reinforce power structures that favor them. People with power develop technology that reinforces power structures that favor them. So I think it's like really important that we don't lose sight of the fact that people, technology, and institutions will reinforce power structures as long as there is an imbalance in the power that people have, because you can't separate out people from technology and institutions. So that's my little rant, sorry.
Thank you.
Does anybody want to respond on that? We've got about 1 minute, so I'm not sure how much we can say, but does anybody have anything they want to respond back? John?
How about getting AI to retrain people?
I think it's a very, very important point, and the distribution of power in the world is hugely uneven, and the distribution of wealth is hugely uneven, and the blindness of culture is huge. So Western institutions training their data on English language texts is not going to represent 90% of the world. There is no incentive, there's no capital incentive to change that behavior aside from change it when you get caught out. And I think this gentleman's point about being in front of a judge is very true. Unfortunately, 90% of the population never get in front of a judge. The algorithmic decisions are being made for their lives by these machines that are inherently biased, and no one even knows the bias is there. So it requires active work to make the things as we would like them to be. And we're at the stage where it's not. At the moment, it's just shovel the data in. You know, we've got the big data, shovel it in, we get out what the Western world on the internet looks like. And it's not a pretty place, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think the thing we need to remember is that it's not so much about algorithms now. So referring to the chatbots, you know, the chats have been around for a long time. They are more rule-based ones, as you know better than I do. The point is about these new models is that they're not really algorithms. They're basically models trained on large data sets. And what concerns me is that there's not enough talk about those data sets and the biases in those data sets. People are saying, well, we've got a model, we'll align it. Just start with the material that it's made from, the raw materials. That's really the thing that's not being talked about enough. I referred earlier to, we've got an American language bias in these models, and but it's, anyway, I've said my piece.
Yeah, I think Adebisi's got a last word as well.
So in the conversation,
Where's this mic? Only you as well.
Yeah. In the conversation around AI and its deployment, its design and development in society, it's important that we engage civil society, stakeholders, the tech companies, communities that will be impacted by the use of AI, and communities that have been impacted by use of AI in these conversations. Without this group of people at the table, we have a very, very gloomy future.
Fantastic. I don't know why this mic doesn't work for you, because it's never failed on me yet. So there you go. AI in action. I think that's a brilliant place to end it, because we're obviously well over time. I'd love everybody in the room to give a massive hand for our fantastic panel. Thank you very much. I'll pass back over to the wonderful Oscar.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, continue the applause. Give yourselves an applause. Thank you very much for your ideas, your questions, and for Lincoln's fantastic rant. Thank you so much for coming. That's it for tonight, but you've definitely given me lots of ideas for future events. There's a lot of thought and lots of people care about this issue. People do care. And we can do something with that. So stay tuned for future Brighton Data Forum events on AI, where your ideas and your voices will be shaped. Another round of applause for the panel, and thank you very much for tonight. Bunch of the audience, we're headed over the street to the Old Albion pub for more personal, interpersonal questioning and answering sessions. So please feel welcome to come and meet with us. Actually, just go ahead and march over to the Old Albion across the street here. I'll need to clean up some chairs and stuff, and I'll be with you as soon as I can. Okay? Enjoy.
One more round of applause for Oscar.